I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE, symbol CRL, and the Pink, symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for institutionaladvisors.com. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Yeah, hi, Jim. Here we go again.
Crude oil making a comeback?
Yeah, we're getting a pretty good rally here this week. Even today it's up nicely, but there's and the dollar is steady. U.S. dollar is steady to firmer, so something genuine going on. There could be a good seasonal move in here going on, but they're up to almost 70 here. And what was it? Not a while ago, yeah. Whereas with the hit to the markets early in the year down to February, crude fell down to 58, oversold, and then it's been trading around 68 now for 3 weeks, and today is a little higher than the highs reached over the last 3 weeks. I haven't seen any story with it. It's just acting well, but as I said, it's with the U.S. dollar being slightly firmer today. So,
well, it's almost $70 a barrel.
Yeah, 69.73, up almost 2% on the day, and the U.S. dollar is up to 92.66, and that's up 0.25%, which is a nice move there. But we, going back a bit, had been looking for the credit markets, and we use the term sunshine for the credit markets. Could be coming in May, and yes, the yield curve continues to flatten, which is a sign of the boom, friendly to the boom, and the credit spreads continue to narrow, which is always a positive. And then some of the industrial commodities did, like some of the base metals did a straight up spike in early April, straight up, straight down. And we noted at the time that it seemed to be an example of a silly season, because you've seen in that window, March or April, if you're in a speculative market, you can get some unusual things going on, which in the case of the base metals, wow, that was there. And then you've got some unusual headlines out of Venezuela.
Well, we can talk about that in a bit, Bob.
Oh.
What I'm wondering is if the price of oil is so much stronger, why the Canadian dollar hasn't improved some.
Oh, well, Canada is a disaster. What's the Canadian doing here now this morning?
It's 77.80.
Yeah, it's down it's down a bit, yeah. The problem with Canada is that the federal government, with the Liberals winning the last election, prior to that you had a decade of the Conservatives with a minority government and then a majority, attempting to reintroduce the idea of a limited government in Canada. And then, of course, with the Liberals, it is, oh no, we are back to the 1960s socialism, where everything has to be rigged and fiddled with, and the taxes, they did some sort of reform thing, but all it did was really raise taxes. And then you have too many provinces that are with socialist governments, and you've got a struggle between the province of BC not liking pipelines. At least the government does at the moment. So you have a constitutional crisis. The federal government should be much more active in making sure that the pipeline goes ahead, because it has been due process. It's the law. And you have here a mob rule going on. So at the same time in the States you have what is developing as a reform of big, intrusive, and expensive government. You know, the popular uprising there is against, the phrase I've been using now is in your wallet and in your face government. So they come intruding into your life and take your money for intruding into your life. It's crazy, but it's been accepted for such a long time until a popular uprising got fed up and said no, and it happens to end up with Trump as a leader, but they are getting tax cuts through. They are diminishing rules and regulations. So the new world is happening in the States, and the federal liberals and then the socialists in too many provinces are trying to take it back to the 1960s socialism. So it is not healthy. You've got Canada's an important grain producer and exporter, but they can't get cars for shipping. They can't get track time for shipping grain because they're shipping crude oil by train, because the politics are against pipelines. And the one that is not at the forefront now but is bad is that the pipeline that should have been built to the eastern part of the country, whereby you can sell Canadian oil to eastern consumption, and you would then prevent the freighters coming with heavy crude from Venezuela to the East Coast, and yet it doesn't happen. You're favoring, and in the case of Venezuela, a very evil socialist government, and you're not helping Canada this way. And it's largely on the action against pipelines is largely based on superstition. I mean, where would we be without modern technology, cars, planes, elevators, roads, and all this thing? That modern society depends upon ample and cheap energy.
Well, right now, Bob, we are crisscrossed with thousands of miles of pipelines everywhere in this country, and people seem to be perfectly fine living on top of them.
Yeah, well, the one issued now at the forefront is Trans Mountain Pipeline, and it's got its approvals in 1952, and I think it's been the construction was 53, so it's been going for a long time on then what is now old technology, and there's never been a problem. Of course, yes, part of it is that they're going on about is transporting the crude by tankers through the Straits of Georgia.
Double-hulled tankers, which have never had a major accident.
Yeah, they've not had one, and the major accident, Valdez, was due to a problem with the captain being drunk. So that, it is a carefully cultivated and then broadcasted superstitions about energy, and it's disturbing to see it, and it's disturbing to see that, in the United States, the number that comes up about pipelines, I think there's 2.5 million miles of pipeline there.
Also in Seattle, they're having protests not to keep pipelines out, but they want a pipeline to the port so they don't have to ship oil by tanker car.
Well, that's a good one, too, yeah.
Yeah. We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after the break.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Hoye. Bob, what's going to happen with gold?
Gold is in a problem. The old formula whereby the Federal Reserve is evil, it's going to depreciate the currency, and gold is going to go to $10,000, hasn't been working, and the last big boom in gold concluded in 2011 with tremendous technical readings on the upside. We had that one called right. And it's been very disappointing then. But what you have is that since 2011, the boom in the financial markets has been fantastic. And we've found that in great bubbles in the past, all the way back to the South Sea bubble in 1720, is that in the final period of that kind of a boom, the real price of gold goes down. So the gold miners don't make as much money, and their stocks may go up with the boom, but they're not the big performers. And in this case, gold stocks were so high in 2011 that they've come down hugely, but they're stabilizing over the last year or so, as is the real price of gold. But what is required is that the financial bubble ends, like in 1929. But the problem is, as it ends, the downdraft in the big stock market will take the gold stocks with it. But anyways, the net on it, Jim, is that in a post-bubble contraction, the real price of gold goes up. It makes the margins for mining it more attractive, and you get a terrific bull market for gold stocks. But see, in a crisis, which always follows a great bubble, the very careful money goes to the most liquid items. And the most liquid items are short-term notes in the senior currency, which is U.S. dollars. So they'll be buying treasury bills, and that'll mean there'll be a bid for the dollar. Then the other really good liquid item is gold. And, of course, then there'll be a bid for gold. But if you've got the same panic pushing people into U.S. dollars and into gold, you're not going to get a big gain in U.S. dollars. But if you're in a lesser currency that's going down, of course, you get the gain. But our plan is to keep standing aside of gold stocks and wait until the opportunity comes to buy them. And it'll be a fantastic opportunity, and I'm quite sure we'll be able to make the call.
We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after this.
I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineered gold mine in the Atlan District of northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Hoye. Bob, we talked about it very briefly at the start of the show about hyperinflation in Venezuela. Courtesy to BNN, we've seen footage of people in Venezuela throwing their money away into the streets because it's virtually worthless. The minimum wage in Venezuela now, 1 million bolivars. Sounds like a lot of money. That's less than $2 U.S.
Yeah, well.
So have we seen this kind of phenomena before?
Oh, yeah. It hits lesser countries like banana republics it's not that Venezuela was a banana republic, but it turned into one, and it is an example, Jim, of central planning at its best, backed up by authoritarians. So it's the socialists again who want to run things, and of course they just run things into the ground, and then in order to make it seem as if everybody's got some money, they start printing it, and this is what they're doing. But I made a note the other day where somebody had got, this was dated May the 1st, in Venezuela, 5 years of severance pay now buys a coffee. So whatever, you've been working for a company for 5 years, maybe it represents a pension sort of thing, but that's a tragedy, And the one that I recall, and the previous hyperinflation in Europe occurred in the early 1920s in Germany, where they had to make massive reparations after the First World War, which ended in 1918. And there was a couple of economists who had theories about issuing banknotes, and they started doing that. And it ended up with, images of people going around with wheelbarrows full of money, currency. And people at factories would get paid 3 times a day, and then they had to leave the factory, rush out, and buy something in order to, convert to reality. So, but there's a sadness in there as well, other than the destruction. We've all seen and enjoyed the musical movie Cabaret, which then shows the corruption in Berlin in the cabarets at that time, and that's what happened. Now, the middle classes in Europe prior to this meant somebody who had investments such that they could live on the income from it. They didn't have to work. And then these were all careful investments invested for income, and they all went, of course, to hell on that. But I remember one about a gentleman who was with the Berlin Symphony, and he then suddenly, they caught up to him, realized that his savings that he was living off of the interest on could buy him a tram ticket. So he got on the tram, paid for the ticket, got on the tram, went into the country, and killed himself. So there's real tragedy in inflation. Now, the inflation that we experienced in Canada and the United States and England in the 1970s was just plain government printing money, but it was more or less issuance of credit, and everybody speculated in real things, tangible assets, gold, silver, metals, and also wages were inflated. And in the U.S., the CPI inflation got up to something like 15%. But, compared to the rampant inflation in 1920, in the U.S., the CPI inflation on that one got up to something like 23% before it blew out. But of late, since the 80s, when in 1980 the huge peak in inflation blew out, and then that shifted over to speculation in financial assets. So I've been calling it inflation in financial assets, and this is where it perplexes the gold bugs, because they know evil central bank, currency depreciation, gold goes up, but it hasn't. Mainly because when you get into the phase of the period of time when it's time for speculation in financial assets, it happens, and gold doesn't go with that one. So this is in Venezuela is a travesty of policymakers destroying the economy, destroying people's lives, and there will be some very sad stories coming out of there until the public rebels, a popular uprising, and throws the current government out of office. And in the case of the Weimar inflation in 1922, eventually the policymakers said, oh, this isn't working. And they then tied the mark to a bushel of rye or the equivalent. That's not rye whiskey, that's the grain. And then they just plain got disciplined and said, we're not going to do it anymore. And this is what it takes. But, you know, Canada is doing what the Venezuelan government is doing, which is intruding in everything and messing things up. And then as things get more hard times, they will then push more currency out, depreciate the currency more. It's just that in Venezuela, it has happened so fast that you can look at cause and effect and say, yeah, this is what's doing it. Whereas the inflation in the 1970s in Canada and the U.S. was over a period of time, and the policy makers were deliberately confusing everybody about it. And it wasn't until it was over that people figured it out. I can remember talking to fund managers in 1980 or 81, and they finally realized that it was the printing press, the government ease, the central bankers were causing the inflation, and that was when it was over. So here we are. Venezuela is the current example of a sound economy and a reasonably sound government and a good country surrendering to socialists, and then they became brutal, and they're really doing it. So the only end to it would be to throw them out. In Canada, if the government of Canada acts and really does shut down the mob on the pipeline thing, and you can go back to producing and exporting energy, and also it would be help in exporting grains too, that would be very constructive, and I think that they can do it.
Well, when people said there's professional protesters against the pipeline, people from Greenpeace are professional protesters. It's a corporation. It's not a charity.
Yeah.
And whose corporate interest are they representing?
Well, they're not corporate. Maybe they're incorporated for tax things, but it is an NGO. And we also know that Soros is funding it. Krauss, the journalist, a couple of years ago got into, in the U.S., various NGOs and charities have to file statements with the income tax people on where they get their revenues from and where they send it to. And this is where then the money is coming from those entities in the States into Canada, and much of it can be traced back to George Soros or the Rockefellers. And these people are eventually hoping for one world government once. So it's a tragedy. In Canada, it's a slow tragedy. In Venezuela, it's a fast tragedy. But in each case, like in the Weimar Republic in late 1922, the actual government and those at the central bank just said, oh, we're being foolish, let's just stop it. And they did stop it. So, and then after the war in Germany, when military of Russia, England, and the United States were running things, and again it was too much money, and they had people were transacting in cigarettes, and then one of the senior politicians in Germany just said, no more, we won't print, and we're going to have a sound money, and he just bypassed the military governments. And so somewhere within a country, the people or a leader have the ability to reform, and I'm welcoming it in Canada. It's already the reform is happening in the U.S. and is yet not in Venezuela. But it is certainly fascinating to watch, Jim.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, good to be with you, and we look forward to next week.
My guest has been market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for institutionaladvisors.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Any questions for our guests like Bob can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.